Hey all, Spoons Rattling here. This is just a compilation video of all the videos I've done on Dark Angels units. I wanted to compile them all in one place in case somebody just wanted to marathon them all. Anyways, the videos are going to start. A few of them are my old PowerPoint videos, which I'm not super proud of, but I figured I would include them all. After the first 4, I believe it switches to my more higher standards that we see today. Anyways, let's get into it. See you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling. Welcome to another video where today we are covering the Inner Circle Companions who got a buff just today in the Balanced Data Slate. And I love these models, so obviously I want to cover how cool they are, even though this is technically different from all the Chaos stuff I've been doing. Though, I mean, they're Dark Angels, so are they really not Chaos? Anyways, so the Inner Circle Companions come in at 90 points for 3, or 180 for 6, which is pretty standard, if a bit pricey for Elite Space Marines. They come in at move 6 inches, standard, toughness 4, standard, with 3+ save, 3 wounds, which is very nice to make them a little bulky and resistant to damage 2 weapons. Leadership 6+ is of course handy to resist battle shock shenanigans, and OC1 is nothing special, but it is nice to be able to contest objectives, as well as do secondary actions in the new mission pack. In terms of ranged weapons, they're obviously unimpressive, you can tell because none of them hold them. Except for the guy with the banner, and even then he's holding the banner. The heavy bolt pistol comes in at 1 attack that hits on 3s. It's strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1. A very standard pistol. It has 18-inch range. I just realized I didn't put the range on the ranged weapon. What am I doing? Then we have the Calibanite Greatsword, which has 2 modes, strike and sweep. The strike gets lethal hits, gets 4 attacks, ballistic skill 3+, strength 6, AP 2, and damage 2. A very nice general purpose profile that's very good at killing most kinds of space marines. Then it can go into sweep mode if it needs to deal with hordes, which gets a beefy sustained hits 2, 5 attacks at ballistic skill 3+, strength 6, AP 2, and damage 1, which is of course a nightmare for any horde opponent that these guys might run into. Which is, of course, very nice to have the flexibility, and these guys' melee is vicious enough that they really can tangle with most things in the game, with the exception of the heaviest stuff, but the lethal hits even patches up that weakness. With Oath of Moment, just reroll everything that isn't a 6, and you'll be laughing. They have 2 abilities. They have the Brazier of Judgment, which is, while they're led by a character, this unit's -1 to hit, which is nice for extra durability, especially good if you're uncovered or really double down on how tough these guys can be. Then Enmity of the Unworthy, I just realized I left the Y off. When this unit attacks a character unit, you can reroll 1s to hit. This is of course very nice. They hit on 3s, and rerolling 1s makes them very accurate naturally, and then if you're not fighting the Oath of Moment target, of course it's just a source of rerolls in general. Again, these guys are very fighty in melee. They really do chop things up with those great swords, and the main buff they received is an extra attack on their sweep mode, which makes it really, really nasty. And the AP2 from AP1, which is what they should have been. But now that they are AP2, they are much, much more dangerous against just about everything in the game. And then in terms of leaders, anything that can join a Stern Guard, and then any Tacticus Armored or Mark 7 Power Armored Dark Angels character can lead them. In terms of using them, another indirect buff was the buff to Impulsors, as now you can fit 6 of them and a character inside an Impulsor if you don't want to foot slog them, which is understandable. They are rather pricey to want to have to foot slog across the board. But even still, I think with their -1 to hit and having their best leader along, who's Azrael, give them a 4+ invulnerable save, I think they are pretty tough. But regardless, the Impulsor is still a great option just to get them up the board faster. In terms of detachments, they're good pretty much anywhere. Their melee stats are beefy enough to help them chop through just about anything. But in Dark Angels specific, the Deathwing Task Force got a nice buff where you can choose to have any of the objectives that you don't control be your vow of vengeance or something like that, which gives you +1 to wound. And that's really useful with their strength 6 profiles, which makes them super efficient against just about everything. Even toughness 12 things will be wounded by them on a 5+, which is much better than a 6. And of course, anything below toughness 12, you're wounding on a 4, which is really meaty. Then, as I said, Azrael gives them the 4+ invulnerable save, and the Watcher in the Dark, which gives you the feel no pain against devastating wounds, or mortal wounds, which are devastating wounds again now. And his melee is really powerful, so is his ranged weapon. I'd say that Azrael is just by far the best person to have lead these guys. Though anyone would appreciate the extra muscle of having these guys behind him, though of course he can't lead the other chapter's characters, obviously. I think that these guys are just outstanding, really. I think they're really strong at 90 points, and I will definitely be running some of them in my Loyalist army, which isn't technically Dark Angels, but I'm just going to paint them up as my guys, and now I have some cool guys in robes with swords. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling. Welcome to another video where today we are covering one of my favorite units in all of the Space Marines, and also some of my favorite models of all time in the Deathwing Knights. Now, the Deathwing Knights are the most elite infantry that the Dark Angels have to offer, and are some of the most elite infantry that the Imperium as a whole have to offer. Not that the Imperium would really know what they are. They tend to activate only when needed, and will act very swiftly, despite the fact that they're almost all in Terminator armor. Let's get into it with their stats. The Deathwing Knights come in at a flat 235 points for 5, which is my only problem with them, is I want to run them in at 10, but I have to run them in a 5 unless I run them as, say, Assault Terminators, but I don't know, these rules are just so fun. Anyways, they move 5 inches, they're toughness 5, 2+ save, they have a 4+ invulnerable save, and they have 3 wounds. I'm not sure where the 3, sorry, not 3, they have 4 wounds. What am I talking about? 4 wounds, I'm not sure where the 4 went, but regardless, leadership 6+, and OC 1. So they are very tough, though a bit slow on the board. Since they only come in 5s, they're the perfect size to put in a Land Raider. And the 4 wounds means they really are super tough. Even high AP stuff, high damage stuff, really has to be essentially full-blown anti-tank weapons. Even things like plasma cannons with damage 3 are really ineffective against these guys. In terms of melee weapons, they can all either take a Mace of Absolution or a power weapon. The Mace of Absolution is Anti Monster and Anti-Vehicle 4+, which is very useful for helping them punch up. Then it comes in at 4 attacks. They hit on 2s, so they're super accurate. They have Strength 6, AP 2, and Damage 2. Then you can swap that out for a power weapon, which loses the anti-keywords, but gains an attack, and then is also hits on 2, Strength 6, AP 2, and Damage 2. Both very good flexible profiles. Though I'd probably say I prefer the maces just because I like the anti-rules a little bit more. And they really only patch up their biggest weakness, which is stuff like Land Raiders and Big Knights that they'll be wounding on 6s. Then the Champion, or Watchmaster. No, Watchmaster's the Death Watch. Can't remember. It's not Strike Master. Sergeant. We'll just call him a Sergeant. He can take a Great Weapon of the Unforgiven, which you definitely should. That comes with Devastating Wounds and Sustained Hits 1, which means it's the most flexible in general, maybe excluding against Toughness 6 targets. Then it comes with 5 attacks at Strength 6, AP 2, Damage 2, hitting on 2s. Very powerful and definitely worth the upgrade for the Sergeant. Then they have 3 abilities, though 2 of them are only War Gear abilities. You can deploy a Teleport Homer anywhere on the board, more than 9 inches away from your enemy's deployment zone. And then once per game, you can use Rapid Ingress for 0 CP if you set them up within 3 inches of the Teleport Homer and outside of 9 inches of enemy models. Honestly, the Teleport Homer itself isn't a super powerful ability, but what it does allow you to do is start applying pressure immediately, which is useful. I mean, just dropping this thing in a place where the opponent sort of has to deal with it, or run the risk of these really tanky, really powerful Terminators appearing and then wreaking havoc on their army, where they'll probably struggle to kill them. Then here's where things get really nice. It's their Inner Circle rule. Very simple, but they get -1 damage from all attacks. This makes pretty much all weapons ineffective against them. Even the biggest weapons, like giant las cannons, have a good chance of not killing one of them, if they even manage to punch through their save. And also, it means that even if something is like an insane damage 8 weapon, you're wasting it on a 4-wound model. So it's really a lose-lose situation trying to kill these guys. Ironically, I'd say one of the better ways to kill them is to just shower them with damage 1 attacks and just whittle them down slowly. But, I mean, 2+ save, 4+ invulnerable, it's really hard to find weapons that are effective against them. Then, they also get to bring along a little Watcher in the Dark, little homie. And for once per game, you can summon him up, and you get a Feel No Pain 4+ against Mortal Wounds, which does work against Devastating Wounds now, because Devastating Wounds are Mortal Wounds again, which is another thing that would be good against them, but if you're about to get slammed by, a bunch of Devastating Wounds, you can just open up with the Watcher in the Dark. So the best way to use them is pretty simple. I mean, they're tough, they hit pretty damn hard, and they are big, beefy Terminators. You could load them up with a Land Raider, which I think would be totally reasonable. Land Raider, 5 of these guys in a character, would be very dangerous and would have to be a top priority for your enemy to kill. But they're tough enough that I don't think foot slogging is necessarily a bad choice, but it will make them more so of a ponderous threat where if your enemy comes even close to their charge range, they run the risk of getting beaten to a pulp with maces or chopped to bits with swords. In terms of their weapons, I overall prefer the maces just because I like the anti-rules. I think they are very handy and help them punch up against the only things that would be really resilient to them. But the swords are fine, and they do get the benefit of the extra attack. In terms of who to lead them with, Captain is the obvious choice. Giving them free stratagems is great, especially, say, in Deathwing, or Inner Circle Task Force, sorry. The Inner Circle, you could, every turn, be giving them -1 to wound from stuff higher than their toughness. So they'd be even more resilient, just really doubling down on that. In terms of detachments, I'd say they'd function pretty well everywhere. They'd like the extra speed from, like, Stormlance or Gladius. They'd enjoy the sort of synergies with transports that you can get in Firestorm, and of course they're right at home in Inner Circle. The +1 to wound makes their weapons even more efficient. They're at the perfect point where +1 to wound makes them very effective against just about everything. Again, excluding toughness 12, which could be a problem, but again, the +1 to wound from their own detachment is so useful, and it is a big damage buff against them. They just still struggle a little bit. If you're not using that, I'd say a Chaplain is almost an underrated pick, as it gives them the Feel No Pain 4+ against mortal wounds. Again, devastating wounds, very big defense against them. And he gives them a +1 to wound always, unconditionally, which is also really, really nice, as that is really just going to patch up their one weakness in melee. Now, there is the thing that you can't take more than 5 of them, which for most people isn't a problem, I'd say, but I love giant units of Terminators in my Chaos Marines and my Loyalist Marines. I'd really love to run these guys in a 10-man squad, but I think I know why they didn't let you run them as a 10-man squad, because that squad would just be legitimately unkillable. There would be nothing you could do to kill it. And even circling back to leaders, Chaplain in Deathwing Assault Force isn't the worst, because you're probably going to have Azrael in the force somewhere who gives you a free CP, which you could use on them every turn if you wanted to. And again, as I said, they fit perfectly into a Land Raider with character, and you're not missing out on any models. Really, these guys are sort of the emblem of, just load them up and fire them at your opponent, and they either have to focus a lot of fire to kill them, or they have to deal with the fact that they are going to brutalize whatever they get into combat with. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling. Welcome to another video where today we are covering the lead interrogator chaplain of the Dark Angels, that being Asmodai, infamous for his very brutal methods of interrogation and being very effective at interrogating. He's a classic character that fits very well into the Dark Angels and 40k as a whole, and he has a great model. In fact, I think he always has. I really liked his old model, and his new model is one of my all-time favorites, but maybe that's just my bias towards Dark Angels. In terms of his points, he comes in at 70 of them, and his stats are pretty standard for a Marine character. Movement 6, Toughness 4, a 3+ save, surprisingly, an invulnerable save 4+, 4 wounds, Leadership 6, and OC 1. Very standard for a sort of not quite like a Captain or Chapter Master weight character. He comes with the Heavy Bolt Pistol, which is just 18-inch range, 1 attack, hits on 3, strength 4, AP 1, and damage 1. Very underwhelming. I wouldn't really use it if you're fighting infantry, because if you shoot out just one model, you can make your charge longer, but if there's some guardsmen off to the side, you could pretty easily blast at them and probably kill a couple of them, because that's all it's really good for, is killing the lightest infantry. Of course, he has that giant sword and his Crozius, so he wants to be in melee. He has his Crozius and power weapon. On strike, it gets 5 attacks that hit on 2, strength 6, AP 2, and damage 2. An upgraded version of the Crozius' normal profile. Then the Crozius and power weapon on sweep gets 8 attacks that hit on 2s, strength 5, AP 2, and damage 1. Very good for clearing out hordes, which would be just a very useful thing to have, just in case you're getting bogged down by, say, Gretchen. This is a great profile for cutting through infantry like that. His abilities are pretty standard. He has Exemplar of Hate, and while he's leading a unit, every time a model in that unit makes a melee attack, you can reroll the hit roll, which is obviously very good. He hits on 2s, so he's going to be hitting pretty much every attack, and who he's leading are probably hitting on 3s or maybe 2s depending on the circumstances, and rerolling there is really useful. Then, of course, he wouldn't be an Interrogator Chaplain without an Interrogator ability, and when enemy characters within 6 inches of this model must take a Battle Shock test at -1 at the start of the fight phase, and if Asmodai kills an enemy character, you gain 1 CP, only in melee, but I can't imagine a bolt pistol would ever be able to kill a character, given the fact that it only has damage 1. Which is a useful enough ability, mainly just to counter things like counteroffensive, but it's more so whatever. You're bringing him for the reroll hits, basically. Which he does trade out from a normal Chaplain's -1 to wound, but I think that's a fair trade for rerolling all hits, -1 to wounds. They're both very powerful. Of course, there's some overlap with Oath of Moment, but Oath of Moment synergizes better with shooting than melee, so having this always on the go is just really helpful in general. And also allows Asmodai to sort of go off and do his own thing in case, say, your Deathwing Terminators, or what's another melee unit we could talk about? Azrael is charging into the Oath of Moment target. This guy could go off and do his own thing. In terms of how good he is at fighting, he of course has a pretty solid generalist profile, though he would really like the +1 to wound from the Inner Circle Task Force, obviously. And really all he would struggle with in that sort of situation would be toughness 12 things. Knights with their 3+... Knights would be a problem because of their toughness, though the AP2 is really good against their 3+ saves, and Land Raiders would definitely give him trouble. And sort of vehicles in that weight class, obviously, he's only 70 points. He was punching way above his weight, even if he does chip off a few wounds, which he is likely to do with his rerolling hit rolls and the various detachment abilities he can get. Let's get on to how I would use him. So I'd say he probably is at his best leading a squad of Inner Circle companions in an Impulsor. The reason I put the Inner Circle over, say, Blade Guard is the Blade Guard already get rerolls 1 to hit, which overlaps with Asmodai's ability. And the Inner Circle companions have baked in abilities, if you will, on their weapons. Universal Special Rules is what I mean. They have lethal hits on Strike and sustained hits 2 on Sweep. And in situations where those are going to be valuable, fighting hordes or fighting vehicles, you could reroll everything that isn't a 6, and you'll not only be hitting almost all of your hits in general, but you'll also be getting a lot of extra ones with the sustained hits too. Seriously, they are so good at carving through infantry, it's not even funny. Didn't expect that to come up in the playlist, but hey, that's what you get when you shuffle your playlist. In terms of detachments, I'd say that a good option would be the Inner Circle detachment, because the +1 wound is just really good, and there's some good abilities in there, -1 to wound, stuff like that, that you can proc. On these guys, I think that would be worth it. And as I mentioned, I think they would be best out of an Impulsor, just because it fits them perfectly, and they aren't quite as tough as if they had Azrael around, because they wouldn't have the invulnerable save. And an Impulsor in general is just a good battlefield bunker. They could, say, load up into a Land Raider with... this would be kind of a really insane battlefield bunker, but say Asmodai, his companions, Azrael and his companions could fit into one of the bigger Land Raiders for just a pretty crazy amount of melee to jump out, which I actually think could work just for the fact that the melee that you would be delivering would be so impactful, and there would be so much of it, they could split off, go charge their own things. Though you would have to bring either a Crusader or a Redeemer, if I'm not mistaken. But again, that is an option if you just want to rocket a Land Raider up the board. I can't say I blame you. I'd say that in general, though, Asmodai plays second fiddle to Azrael. Obviously, Azrael's the best character in Dark Angels, but I don't think Asmodai is bad. I think he's just overshadowed for the most part. But I mean, Asmodai has such a baller model. I mean, the hood, the sensors, the baller boss mode stance is what I call it, is so good. Like, how could I leave him on the shelf? He's just such a cool model. And I do think he is powerful enough in sort of focusing companions into what they're already good at, where Azrael's good at making them more general purpose. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I will see you all when I am trapped inside a box of Dark Angels Deathwing Terminators. See ya! Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling. Welcome to another video where today we are covering the Grand Master of the Librarians for the Dark Angels, sorry, that's Ezekiel. Now, he is a very long-standing character in 40k lore. He's been around for a long time, as you can tell by his very old model, which is way, way overdue for an update. Anyways, let's get into it. So Ezekiel comes in at 75 points, which is about the same as his contemporary Asmodai. He has actually pretty much the exact same stat line, though he does have a 2+ save, where Asmodai only has a 3+ for some reason. Aside from that, he has movement 6, toughness 4, 2+ save, 4+ invulnerable save, 4 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. A very standard sort of medium character profile. In terms of ranged weapons, he has his mastercrafted bolt pistol, the Deliverer, which is pistol and precision at 12-inch range. It has one attack that hits on 2s at strength 4, AP 1, and damage 2. Pretty solid at splatting a light infantry or two. Or, no, splatting a light infantry. It's only got one attack after all. And then his main ranged weapon is his Mind Wipe Psychic Power, which has devastating wounds, precision, psychic at 12-inch range with one attack that hits on 2s, strength 4, AP 2, and damage D6. Very standard, if not very good at sniping characters, and also strength 6, not strength 4. Not sure where I got that. Of course, with precision and devastating wounds, it's very solid at sniping out lighter characters, and is a threat to pretty much every character in the game, with the exception of, I believe, Custodes' Terminator shield captains. Of course, you'd have to roll a 6 to kill them, but, they're still able to be sniped out by this. And you can upgrade it to gain anti-character 4+, which is definitely worth it against characters that are above toughness 6. And I think the hazardous test is more than worth the trade-off. Even though, it does run the risk of nearly killing Ezekiel, it's just nice to have because it will also allow you to really punch up against something like a Chaos Knight, which this guy is surprisingly threatening against, as D6 devastating wounds is obviously very nasty. He does, of course, have to be very close to the enemy to do this, but of course his melee is not too bad and is quite exceptional for a Librarian, though isn't too standout aside from that. He carries the Trader's Bane, which is anti-chaos 2+. It's a psychic weapon, with 4 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6, AP 2, and damage D3, one of the few remaining D3 weapons outside of grenade launchers. This is a very interesting melee profile, very good at killing most kinds of marines and similar sort of enemies. Though, of course, its D3 damage is rather swingy, which means it could struggle to kill even a single Space Marine. This does have something to do with his buffs, but I do wish it had 5 attacks instead of 4, which in a way it does, but it would have been nice if it had it baseline. In terms of abilities, he has 3. He has his Psychic Hood, which of course gives you you and your unit a 4+ Feel No Pain against psychic attacks. He has Engulfing Fear, which in the shooting phase you select one enemy unit within 18 inches and they take a Battle Shock test. Fairly ho-hum, as most Battle Shock things are. In terms of his Book of Salvation, which he has strapped to his side, this is where most of his power comes in. While he's leading a unit, you add one of the attacks characteristics of weapons that the models are equipped with, and also, if he dies, all friendly units within 6 inches must test Battle Shock, which is not ideal, but it isn't really the end of the world. After all, the buff is very powerful. Adding an attack is one of the most powerful abilities you can have in terms of buffing melee units. Now, let's get into how I would use them. Overall, I'd say Ezekiel is more so an interesting collection of ideas, rather than something so straightforward as just slamming Azrael into the enemy and letting him generate CP while he chops up the enemy. You'll have to think a bit more using Ezekiel than you will most other characters to make the most of his buffs, but that's not to say his buffs are bad, they're just more indirect. In terms of his basic buff, which is just +1 attack, that is as simple as it gets. Put him with some Inner Circle companions, they'll be even deadlier than they already are. Jumping out of an impulsor, very solid idea if you really, really just want to chop things up. And his own sword can come into play into something I'll talk about in a minute. Let's focus on his shooting first. His Mind Wipe is genuinely threatening. To things like Imperial Guard characters, it's basically instant death, and to medium characters, it poses a real threat. Of course, with the hazardous tests, it could prove to be, it could bite you back, but it is also useful. And as I mentioned, since it's anti-character, if you're fighting Chaos Knights, for example, which we'll get into more in a minute, you can simply snipe at them and pretty consistently just deal d6 mortal wounds to them, which is really something a knight doesn't want hitting through them, as it mostly bypasses their toughness. His sword, the Traitor's Bane, has anti-chaos 2+, which is entirely matchup dependent, but if you're fighting demons, any of the stripes of heretic marines, or chaos knights, it will come into play quite consistently. It makes him quite threatening to chaos knights, actually, because they can't really rely on anything. Their saves are only okay in melee. He has good AP, which gets through that, and they can't rely on their toughness, which means he's pretty much going to always just be dealing 5d3 damage to knights, which is an odd visual, but it does make him probably the best Dark Angels character for punching up, with maybe some Samael flavored exceptions in there. I'd say, though, on the contrary, from his really good sword and his good melee buffs, his leadership skills are pretty mediocre. The Feel No Pain against Psychic is once again matchup dependent, though in those matchups it will be very impactful, but his Battle Shock test isn't that useful, mainly for the fact that it's in the shooting phase within 18 inches. Doesn't even mean you'll be able to charge them, so you can't necessarily rely on it to counteract counteroffensive. And these guys don't really get anything off of fighting battle shocked opponents, which means it's sort of just kind of whatever. And there's a very good chance they'll go back to full health, or they'll be destroyed by the end of the turn. It's mostly a pointless rule. And if he does get sniped out, that could lose you some victory points by battle shocking some units, which could flip some objectives, which is ironic because he's such a good sniper, but he's also a great sniping target himself. If there's a Vindicare on the other side of the board, there's few targets as valuable as this guy could really throw a wrench in your plans. But if he's off operating on his own with some Inner Circle companions, that isn't the biggest problem. And even then, it's sort of a what-if, because not everyone runs snipers, and most snipers are going to struggle to kill a well-armored Space Marine, and also, they have to get through whatever other defensive mechanics you might have, whether it be the Inner Circle's -1 to companion, -1 to wound from the Inner Circle task force, Feel No Pain, whatever it is. But that is a point to look at. So in general, I'd say Ezekiel, not Asmodai. Ezekiel is behind Asmodai, and definitely behind Azrael, but I think he is strong enough to justify himself if you want him and a bunch of Inner Circle companions that don't already have a character like Asmodai, a chaplain, or Azrael attached. This guy, with some Inner Circle companions jumping out of a Impulsor, would be quite deadly to whatever they get into combat with the exception of things like Knights or Land Raiders. Of course, if they're Chaos Knights, though, Ezekiel, D6 mortal wounds in the shooting phase, then, 5d3 mortal wounds in the fight phase could not quite kill a knight, but pretty much bring it to its knees, and then the lethal hits from the Inner Circle companions could very well bring it down for the rest of it. I think that's totally fine. If Chaos Knights ever get rampant, come knocking to Ezekiel, because if you're Chaos, he is going to chop through you with scary efficiency. And while his damage could be swingy, he could in theory only do 6 damage, he could of course also do 21 damage to a Chaos Knight. That's the nature of random damage results. Overall, I think Ezekiel will be better in the hands of more veteran players, as he's a little bit more, you have to have a purpose to use him rather than just he makes your army stronger in general. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling. Welcome to another video where today we are covering the Deathwing Terminators, who are the elite of the elite. The Deathwing is the first company of the Dark Angels and their successor chapters, and they tend to field themselves almost exclusively in Terminator armor, except in situations where it would be an active detriment. Though some of their units don't always field it, as they just simply don't wear the armor with the war gear configuration they are. The Deathwing are renowned for their brutal efficiency, their stoicism, and unwillingness to give even an inch of ground to the opponent. They usually appear in a blinding flash of light, teleporting from orbit, and quickly and swiftly delivering ends. The Deathwing have many accolades to their name, many of which are like when a 5-year-long rebellion that had claimed hundreds of Space Marines and thousands, if not millions, of Imperial Guard was shut down by a mere 3 squads of Deathwing Terminators in 1 Terran hour. Truly, they are some of the most fearsome warriors that the Imperium has to offer, second probably in reality only to that of the Adeptus Custodes, really. Let's get into their stats. So the Deathwing's Terminator squad comes in at 185 points, which is 10 points more than standard Terminators. They have the standard Terminator stat line of movement 5 inches, toughness 5, a 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, 3 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. Very standard, but that's not a bad thing in this case, as the Terminator stat line is very resilient to most kinds of firepower. Its invulnerable save giving it a good chance to bounce high strength and AP, and its high toughness and 2+ save making it resilient to small arms. Really, the only thing effective against them is dedicated anti-tank, and again, there's a coin flip as to whether or not that actually goes through. In terms of ranged weapons, they all come standard with a Stormbolter, Ratch's Rapid Fire 2, 24-inch range, 2 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Very standard anti-light infantry, but is good anti-light infantry, quite good at killing, say, guardsmen. They can take a heavy flamer for every 1 in 5, as with any of their heavy weapons. The heavy flamer has Torrent, ignores cover, 12-inch range, d6 attacks at auto-hitting, strength 5, AP 1, and damage 1. The Cyclone Missile Launcher gets 2 profiles, Frag, which has Blast at 48-inch range, Attack 2d6, Ballistic Skill 3+, Strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Very solid anti-horde, given its high quantity of attacks, and Blast is always appreciated. The Cyclone Missile Launcher, Crack mode, has 48-inch range, that has 2 attacks, that hits on 3, Strength 9, AP 2, and damage d6. Nice anti-elite or anti-light vehicle punch. It's very nice to have the flexibility, and you do get to keep your Stormbolter when you take that. Though if I'm being real, I wish you could swap out your Stormbolter for another heavy weapon. I think that would be a very cool change. Games Workshop, make it happen. Then, you can take the Assault Cannon, which has devastating wounds at 24-inch range, 6 attacks that hit on 3s, strength 6, AP 0, and damage 1. About as good as infantry killing as you can get, very effective against guardsmen, orcs, and any other lightly armored and low toughness enemies. Very solid, and the devastating wounds helps it punch up a little bit against enemy armor. Then their exclusive and coolest and most iconic weapon is the Plasma Cannon, as we can see modeled here on the right. The Plasma Cannon has 2 modes, of course. At standard, it's Blast with 36-inch range, D3 attacks that hit on 3s, strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. So a slight step up in terms of stats, though lower attack count than the Assault Cannon, sort of a middle ground between the Cyclone Missile Launcher and the Assault Cannon. Then you can Overcharge, which adds Hazardous, an extra pip of strength and damage, and AP. But, of course, there's a risk to blow yourself up, but given that Mortal Wounds Hazardous now deals mortal wounds to the bearer, there is more ways to survive it, which is very handy. They all come standard with Power Fists, which are 3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2. Very solid generalist profile that's good against just about everything in the game, but will slightly struggle to punch up against the toughest vehicles in the game, things like Land Raiders or Knights. The Chain Fist swaps out its accuracy for the anti-vehicle 3+ rule, which makes it excel against vehicles, but struggle more against other things, as it has 3 attacks that hit on 4s, strength 8, AP 2, and damage 2. Very solid, though of course it is less accurate. It depends on what you want your squad to do. If you want them to tango with heavies, bring the Chain Fist. If you want them to be more flexible, bring the Power Fists. Then the Sergeant can, if you want for old school rules, swap out his Power Fist for a Power Weapon, which has 4 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 5, AP 2, and damage 1. Really a profile that's not worth anything unless you're bringing mass amounts of them. I wouldn't recommend bringing that, and I think the Power Fists look cooler, so I don't really see why you would ever bring the Power Weapon. They have 3 abilities. Their Deathwing ability is when this unit makes an attack targeting the Oath of Moment target, you add 1 to the hit roll, which is the standard Terminator rule. But you also get to ignore any or all modifiers to the hit roll, regardless of what you're attacking, which is very useful, especially for things like Chain Fists, which really appreciate not being debuffed, as well as making all of their weapons more accurate. In general, against the Oath of Moment target, they will be super accurate at range and can really pack a punch depending on which detachment you're in. Then, of course, they have the standard Teleport Homer, which is before the game starts. You place the Teleport Homer down somewhere on the map that is greater than 9 inches away from your opponent's deployment zone. And if you want to, you can use Rapid Ingress for 0 CP, but you must drop within 3 inches of the marker, and then the marker is removed. This is mainly useful for mind games, as you can set it up in a location that would be detrimental if your opponent doesn't block, and then that means they either have to hope you're baiting and you aren't going to deep strike there, or they have to delegate resources to screening it out. Regardless, it is a powerful mind game, if not the most practical rule to use. The threat of it is almost more than the power of it itself. Then, of course, they're accompanied by a little Watcher in the Dark, and he allows you to, once per game, gain a 4+ field note gain against mortal wounds, which is useful with the hazardous rules, as they now deal mortal wounds to the bearer and the squad as a whole. Let's get into how I would use them. Oh, where's my mouse? My mouse died. There we go. So the Deathwing, in general, what they do is they pay their points premium as their ability to not be debuffed in terms of hit rolls, which is useful, though they are still susceptible to -1 damage, as most of their damage will be damage 2. Their unique ability to ignore modifiers is, of course, very powerful, but their special weapon is more so middling. The plasma cannon is undeniably the coolest weapon they could take, because it's the plasma cannon, and he's slinging it one-handed. What more could you want? Though I'd say outside of Inner Circle Task Force, it doesn't really serve a purpose, as both the Cyclone Missile Launcher and the Assault Cannon can fill both of its roles much better, though of course there is something to be said in having the flexibility and general purposeness of a big plasma gun. In terms of leaders, they really benefit differently from each of them. If you want to focus more at range, bring a Librarian, as he gives you sustained hits 1. You could bring a Chaplain for consistent +1 to hit, and the Feel No Pain is very useful with the plasma cannons, as if you're unaware, Hazardous doesn't just flat out destroy the model now. It deals 3 mortal wounds, which means with the 4+ Feel No Pain, it is unlikely you are going to blow yourself up, which is really useful. And the Captain is probably overall the best, giving them reroll charges so they can get to melee faster, as well as the fact that they get free stratagems, which in the Inner Circle Task Force, which is really the only detachment I'd use them in, is very good, as you can get a reroll wounds, emergency mortal wounds, and a reactive -1 to wound. As I mentioned, I'd really think these guys are only worth it in the Inner Circle Task Force because their plasma cannon, which is sort of their unique weapon, really loves the +1 to wound, bringing it from a jack-of-all-trades, master of none, to a really effective anti-infantry and light vehicle weapon that can punch up really well, as anything higher than its strength, he'll be wounding on a 4+, so long as it's on a vowed objective, which isn't hard to do, as you'll pretty much always be attacking things that aren't on objectives you control. They also really love all of the enhancements. Turn 1 Deep Strike is very interesting. I think they really appreciate the 6-inch Consolidate you can get. And overall, I'd say those are very useful. And as I mentioned, the stratagems are really, really good. I'd say that bringing a squad of these guys, maybe a big squad with a captain, it would be a very wise choice, as it could be something to stomp up the board very quickly. You could swap the captain out for a chaplain if you prefer, to have something a little bit more focused on durability. And if you really wanted to make these guys objective holding and taking monsters, you could bring a captain and an ancient. The ancient would add in a slightly improved melee weapon and +1 OC, with also some other buffs like +1 to wound, which could be useful when not, or +1 to hit, which could be useful when not attacking the Oath of Moment target, which is when they get their +1 to hit. Overall, I'd say that's more so something that you would bring in more so casual games, as I don't think the Ancient is the most useful, but he would allow you to get 2 enhancements in a squad. Fortunately, you can't bring him alongside the Chaplain or the Librarian, which is definitely unfortunate. Anyways, I think these guys are very solid and worth the upgrade if you're playing Inner Circle Task Force. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all next time when I am live from inside a bottle of plastic glue. Lazarus was the first Primaris Marine to join the Inner Circle, and he acts as the captain of the Dark Angels' 5th Company. He has been known for his unique helm that protects him and many others near him from evil and psychic powers. I'm Spoons Rattling, hello, and we are covering Captain Lazarus. He comes in at 70 points, so 10 points cheaper than a captain, which isn't necessarily the best sign. In terms of stats, he has very standard stats for a Space Marine character. He moves 6 inches, toughness 4, 3+ save, invulnerable save of 4+, 5 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 1. This is, again, fairly standard for a Space Marine character, and not particularly stand out in any way, though not necessarily bad either. Would be nice if he had a 2+ save, though. In terms of ranged weapons, he just has a bolt pistol, which is one attack that hits on 2s at 12-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Strange that it's not master crafted, though. In terms of melee weapons, he has Enmity's Edge, which is anti-psyker 2+, 6 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6, AP 3, and damage 2. In terms of abilities, Intractable Will, while he's leading a unit, when they models die, they can, on a 4+, fight before they're removed from battle, which is some nice insurance against getting charged. And then his other ability is the Spirit Shield Helm, where Lazarus himself only has a 3+ Feel No Pain against mortal wounds and psychic attacks. This is a good durability buff, but if he's on his own, he's not going to last very long. regardless of whether or not he's resistant to these. It would be nice if maybe he gave this to his whole unit. That would make him a very interesting model for durability's sake. However, overall, he's fairly standard for a Space Marine character. Enmity's Edge is worse than most Captain weapons, though the AP3 is a nice touch, though the low to mid-strength doesn't help with the lack of lethal hits or something along those lines. Anti-Psyker 2 Plus does have some niche interactions that makes it very effective against certain enemies, though of course that won't apply in every single game because you're not always going to be fighting Psykers. There is of course benefit to having this sort of specialized melee, however it isn't general purpose, and isn't that much better than a standard power sword outside of the extra AP. It would be nice if he had lethal hits, though I guess you could attach a lieutenant if you desired, though that would be making a rather large investment unit when I think it would be better to swap Lazarus out for a normal captain. It is also strange that he only has a bolt pistol. I feel like that should at least be master crafted. While it wouldn't make a huge difference, it would at least give him the off chance to pop a enemy Space Marine, and would make it more effective against things like knobs. Overall, his damage output is fairly tame. For an epic hero, it really is kind of pathetic, honestly. But he does still have some uses. In terms of what he can lead just about anything in Tacticus armor, which does give him a lot of options, and he does have the Deathwing keyword, which means he can give that to a unit he leads, though Azrael also does this, as does Ezekiel, and I'd say both of them are much better. As I mentioned already, his melee is fairly mediocre for a Space Marine character. It really isn't that much better than, say, a Lieutenant's, spare for the extra AP, though again, Anti-Psyker does have some niche interactions against things like Chaos Knight Abominants, though this also has the side effect of Ezekiel doing that much better while also buffing his squad's damage, which is another problem with Lazarus. While Fighting in Death is good, only on a 4+ with no way to improve it isn't great, and can be accessed better in certain detachments like Inner Circle Task Force, or, that might be the only one, actually. Maybe I was undervaluing his Fights in Death, but regardless, it's only a coin flip chance, and it's not like Lazarus himself is bringing that much threat to the table. Comparing him to, again, someone like, say, Ezekiel or Asmodai, they add a lot more direct damage to their unit, and also don't need to have their unit be depleted to use their own abilities, which makes this guy just sort of weird. He falls into a similar place to Belial. I'm not saying he's as bad as Belial, because he is not as bad as Belial, but he's not that far off. Comparing him to the other Tacticus armor, so non-Terminator units for Deathwing, I'd say he's probably the worst. So, Azrael is obviously better. Ezekiel is, while still a niche unit, I'd say a much better niche unit, because he's a lot more powerful in his niche. Asmodai is a solid unit all around, with his reroll hits pairing really well with the Inner Circle companions. And, is that everyone? I believe that's everyone that isn't in Terminator armor. And even then, I said before, he compares very poorly to a standard captain, as he's an epic hero, which means he can't get enhancements, and you can't use multiple of them. Not that you would want to, but still, it's worth mentioning. The biggest thing is, though, is the enhancements. And because of that, there is no way for him to give a damage buff to his unit, because none of his abilities buff damage, and he can't take enhancements. Overall, he's very niche. As I said, not as bad as Belial, but he's not that far off. I'd rank him and Belial as the weakest non-flyer data sheets we have. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Samael is the 348th Grandmaster of the Ravenwing. He is a brash and confident and well-skilled fighter. Samael is, of course, the Grandmaster of the second company of the Dark Angels, the Ravenwing. So, Samael is, of course, an epic hero that comes in at 130 points. He has a pretty standard bike character profile with 12 inches of movement, toughness 5, a 3+ save, a 4+ invulnerable save, 7 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 2. Fairly standard for a bike, spare for the extra wounds and the 4+ invulnerable save. Would have been nice if he had a 2+ invulnerable save, given his fancy jet bike. In terms of ranged weapons, he's of course slinging around a master-crafted plasma cannon, which only has one profile, unconventionally. That is Blast at 36-inch range, D3 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 8, AP3, and damage 2. A bit of a different profile to the standard plasma talon the Ravenwings are known for. He also has a twin stone bolter, which is twin link rapid fire 2 at 24-inch range, 2 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 4, AP0, and damage 1. Fairly standard anti-light infantry. And a bolt pistol in case he's in combat, which has, of course, 12-inch range, 1 attack that hits on 2s at strength 4, AP0, and damage 1. In terms of range damage, he's alright. I'd say he's a bit of a different kind of range damage, not necessarily better than his Ravenwing Knights. He, of course, has the Raven Sword, which is sustained hits 2, which is very nice for dealing with infantry, at 6 attacks that hit on 2s with strength 6, AP 3, and damage 2. A solid enough melee profile, and I do wish it was a bit stronger compared to the Ravenwing champion. In terms of abilities, he, of course, is Grandmaster, so he can advance, fall back, shoot, and charge. And then his sort of unique rule is cut off their escape. If enemies fall back, they must test Desperate Escape, and if they're battle-shocked, -1 for the result. Now, this is very powerful for a myriad reason. Desperate Escape is perhaps the most devastating thing that happens when you're battle-shocked, as it can lead to you losing huge chunks of your units, or an entire battle tank or something from the Desperate Escape. And he just makes it better. What's not to like? However, I'd say overall that at his points cost, he does have some slight issues. We're going to get into that after that, but I do want to touch on how his advanced shoot and charge is genuinely useful. The Plasma Talons are close range, so they appreciate being able to advance and shoot, as does his own weaponry, and means they don't need something like the Firestorm, I believe it is its name. I don't know why I forgot that. The Salamander's detachment, if you want to advance and shoot those close range weapons. In terms of his uses, Samael has one problem, is that he costs exactly the same as the command squad, which adds 3 bodies that are all pretty tough, that also have plasma talons, which I'd say are more of a side grade to his plasma cannon, given that it is a random shots attack with blast, which means in certain circumstances it'll be better, but the plasma talons are going to average more shots. His sword is also sort of a side grade. While it is better than the champion also gets the apothecary and the banner bearer. They both have Ravenwing Black Knights, which adds on 6 extra attacks, which is really useful, and honestly, probably more than you'll get with his sustained hits, even if you're fishing for them. And even more comparisons to the command squad, they offer a durability buff and regenerating models, and a objective buff with the banner, giving them +1 OC, which means that they offer more in terms of that. Even though Samael's Desperate Escape is good, it's very situationally good. Against an army like Tau, say you destroy a unit and then consolidate into a tank, you could essentially tie up an entire hammerhead and force it to stay in combat with these guys at the risk of a 30-40% chance it blows itself up. And while his advance and charge is nice, it's not very unique. Things like Stormlance and Gladius offer advance and charge, which is arguably better with the command squad, as the command squad gives you +1 to advance and charges, meaning they can move faster than they can with Samael. Overall, I'd say at his points cost being the same as the command squad, he does not offer nearly as much flexibility, as well as the fact that his range damage is effectively a downgrade compared to 3 plasma talons instead of just 1 plasma cannon. There's also the fact that this guy can't take enhancements, so you can't use, for example, Fire Discipline with the Ravenwing Black Knights, or any other enhancement you want to use. I'd say overall that he really is just not as good as the command squad. I think if you're being fluffy, of course, bring him, because that's the coolest way you can build an army. Don't listen to competitive players. They will tell you that it's lame because they are lame. And then, if he dropped 10 or 15 points, I think he would be genuinely competitive compared to the command squad. But as he is now, I'd say leave him on the shelf, which is a shame because he is one of the best looking resin models to ever come out. Anyways, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Belial is the Grandmaster of the First Company of the Dark Angels, also known as the Deathwing. Grandmasters, of course, acting like captains for the companies of the Dark Angels. Hello, everybody. My name is Spoons Rattling. Today we are covering Belial, the Grandmaster of the Deathwing. So, Belial comes in at 85 points with a pretty standard Terminator stat line of 5 inches of movement, toughness 5, 2+ save, a 4+ invulnerable, 6 wounds, and leadership 6+, and OC 1. Fairly standard for a Terminator character, nothing to write home about. In terms of ranged weapons, he has the Master-Crafted Stormbolter, which has Precision, Rapid Fire 2, and has 24-inch range at 2 attacks that hit on 2s with Strength 4, AP 0, and Damage 2. Fairly standard for a Stormbolter, but it is better with the Damage 2, though the lack of AP means it will still struggle to hurt things above Space Marines. In terms of melee weapons, he has the Sword of Silence, which is also Precision at 6 attacks with Ballistic Skill 2+, Strength 6, AP 2, and Damage 2. Now, this profile is pretty disappointing, given the fact that it is pretty much the exact same as the one that the Deathwing Knights can get with their power swords, which isn't great. In terms of abilities, his Grandmaster status means that units in his models in his unit gain precision when they land critical hits, which is a mostly pointless rule, as I believe the Deathwing literally have a stratagem to give them precision, and if not, it doesn't really matter because this guy already has precision. And it's also only on critical hits, which is extremely uncommon, and can't really be relied on to snipe out a character. He also has strikes of retribution, when attacks are allocated to this model, so this model specifically. After the attacks are made, roll d6 for each attack, max of 6. On a 4+, they suffer 1 mortal wound for each. In reality, this is, while a fun rule, almost entirely pointless. While he is tough, he is a Terminator, I don't think he's going to be surviving a lot of attacks, and if there's honestly any more than 6 attacks, chances are he's going to be dead anyways, so this rule would not resolve, as it does not say do not remove this model if it is destroyed, making this ability practically pointless, as well as the fact that it only applies to him, which means his entire unit would have to be dead, at which point he's sort of outlived his usefulness. Overall, these abilities are very, very weak and are significantly worse than the standard Terminator Captain, and this guy has all the downsides of being an epic hero. You can't run multiple of him, and he can't have enhancements. So, normally I would go into how to best use this unit, but I genuinely can't think of a single use for him. If you are going to run him, proxy him as a Terminator Captain, because both of his abilities are awful, and neither of his weapons are that interesting either. Maybe if the Sword of Silence at damage 3 would actually add something to the model, or the unit, instead of just being another power sword that the Deathwing Knights already have 5 of. I guess you could have him leading the normal Deathwing Terminators to get some sniper fire with, say, their plasma cannon, but that seems very roundabout and also would be better served by a librarian. Overall, Belial is 85 points for effectively 1 extra Deathwing Knight with a damage 2 combi bolter. Everything else he adds is completely peripheral and also locks you out of free stratagems and rerolling charges or +1 to wound and extra durability from a chaplain. My best use case scenario for this guy, if you want to use his extremely boring model, is to run him as a Terminator Captain. I'm sorry to all the Belial fans that don't exist, but this guy sucks, his model is boring, and it was boring before his update too. Bye-bye, Belial. Anyways, like, comment, and subscribe. I've been Spoons Rattling. The Ravenwing make up the second company of the Dark Angels. They're a speed-focused formation that uses bikes, storm speeders, land speeders, and planes to find the fallen, to mark their targets for the Deathwing. The exemplars of this are not only great scouts, they are great warriors, and those great warriors we're looking at today. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Ravenwing Black Knights. So, the Ravenwing Black Knights come in at 90 points for 3 or 180 for 6. In terms of stats, they have the standard biker stat line with a little bit extra. They have a 12-inch movement, so very fast, toughness 5, so very resilient to small arms, a 3+ save, so very solid but appreciates cover, and a very handy 5+ invulnerable save, which is generally useful for deflecting any big AP shots, which these guys will be vulnerable to. They have 3 wounds, leadership 6, and OC 2. Very standard, but not a bad thing, because the bike stat line is very good. It's highly resilient to a lot of different weapons, and the invulnerable save adds just a little bit more. In terms of ranged weapons, they all come standard with plasma talons, which, of course, like most plasma weapons, have 2 profiles. At standard, they have rapid fire 1, 18-inch range, 2 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. The plasma talon can overcharge to gain hazardous, though it also gains an extra strength, AP, and damage, bringing it to strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2, which is very, very solid for destroying most types of infantry. 1 in every 3 can swap out for a grenade launcher, which also has 2 profiles. The frag has blast at 24-inch range, D3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Fairly standard light infantry killing, though I would say is very handily outclassed by the plasma talon. The grenade launcher's crack profile, on the other hand, swaps out for only 1 attack with strength 9, AP 2, and damage D3, some solid light armor punch, but I'd say that the grenade launchers aren't really worth bringing, and I'd stick to the plasma talons, because the plasma talons are genuinely very strong anti-infantry. Even though they do need to be quite close ranged, these guys are very fast, they'll want to be in the enemy's face anyways. They also get a bolt pistol, which is 12-inch range at 1 attack that hits on 3s, strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. Standard bolt pistol profile, fine enough if you're stuck in combat with a horde somehow. In terms of melee weapons, they all get the Black Knight combat weapon, which has 3 attacks that hits on 3s at strength 5, AP 2, and damage 1, a very solid generalist profile. This is seen in a lot of elite units, and for a good reason. It's a very strong profile. Units like Chaos Chosen use them. In terms of abilities, if this unit makes a charge, their melee weapons gain anti-monster and anti-vehicle 4+, which makes them shockingly effective against big vehicles and monsters. That also applies to any characters that attach to them, of course. This is, of course, very, very solid and helps them punch up against things that they would normally be very inefficient against without excessive buffs. In terms of their best uses, I'd say the Black Knights in general do have a lot of intrigue in their unit. They're fast, they're tough, and they hit pretty dang hard in melee. They're very good against infantry, and with their anti-keywords, they're very good against vehicles and monsters for that matter. They have a good blend of quality and quantity attacks, and as I mentioned earlier, there are some parallels between them and Chaos Chosen. Of course, these guys are a little tougher and move a little faster at the cost of, I believe, 5 points more. Of course, they are mainly melee focused, and whoever you attach to them, you should have that in mind, and I'd say easily the best one to attach to them is the Ravenwing Command Squad, which adds a champion, a standard bearer, and an apothecary, which buffs their damage, objective game, and their durability, as they get to resurrect a model every turn. As well as increasing their melee damage, because all of them have their own melee weapons, and the champion has a really nasty melee weapons. And in general, I'd say, regardless of detachment, they are very solid. They'd be a good asset to any force just because of their speed and power. Their plasma talons are extremely effective against both light, medium, and for the most part heavy infantry, blending the perfect blend of high-quality attacks with a high quantity of attacks. Each of those plasma talons getting 3 shots at close range is going to give most Space Marines nightmares. While they will drop off slightly against toughness 3, again, they have 3 shots apiece, which is very, very solid. In terms of detachments, they're very at home in their own detachment, of course, enjoying to be able to fall back and freely, and advance and shoot freely. However, I'd say they're probably even better in Stormlance, as that gives them advance and charge, and with their excessive movement, they will very quickly be able to close the distance. And with a command squad, they'll be getting +1 to advance and charge. And their range damage, as I mentioned, is quite good, and the command squad, if you bring one, the apothecary can heal a model should it blow itself up from hazardous rolls. I think even aside from that, just having something this dangerous that can move really fast is useful to not only win in terms of alpha striking, but also in terms of objectives. Their speed and high OC means they're very good at taking objectives, and they'll be perfect in the new mission packs for doing objectives. While you will be losing out on their shooting or fighting, what they can do is in, say, the first 2 turns, they can charge into the depths of the enemy army, clearing out targets that they choose, and then they can go off to do their own thing later off in the game. I will certainly be running a big unit of them in my Terminator Heavy Force, in Inner Circle Task Force, even though they don't benefit from that detachment. I still think they're very worth it, especially for a force focused on Terminators, like the ones I use. Same reason I run Chaos Bikers in Chaos. Anyways, that just about wraps up our review of the Ravenwing Black Knights. I have been, of course, Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me what you think of the sort of new format I'm trying out here. If you like it, if you dislike it, let me know down below, and I'll see you all next time. The most elite of the Ravenwing become Black Knights, and the most elite of the Black Knights ascend even further beyond that to the Inner Circle, and even beyond that can become a Ravenwing Command Squad, accompanying the most elite warriors and the most elite leaders that the Dark Angels have to offer. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Ravenwing Command Squad, which is of course a classic unit for the Dark Angels and their second company, the Ravenwing. So, the Ravenwing Command Squad comes in at 130 points for 3 models, so 40 points a model, which is quite steep. Well, no, 35 points, sorry. Is that right? I hope so. Regardless, I don't have a calculator pulled up. In terms of stats, they have 12-inch movement, toughness 5, a 3+ save, a 5+ invulnerable save, 4 wounds, leadership 6+, and OC 2. Very standard biker stats with an extra wound, but that's a good thing because the bike profile is good. Of course, they will have to go around terrain as they're bikers. In terms of ranged weapons, they all come standard with the very powerful plasma talons, which, like any plasma weapon, have 2 profiles. At standard, it's rapid fire 1 with 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 18-inch range, strength 7, AP 2, and damage 1. And then, of course, overcharging adds hazardous, but also adds in strength, AP, and damage. 1 in 3 can swap out their plasma talons for grenade launchers. The frag profile gets blast with D3 attacks that hit on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. And the crack grenade has 1 attack that hits on 3s at 24-inch range with strength 9, AP 2, and damage D3. They all, of course, also get bolt pistols, which have the pistol keyword, 1 attack that hits on 3s at 12-inch range, strength 4, AP 0, damage 1. just bring the plasma talons. The grenade launchers really aren't worth bringing. In terms of melee weapons, the Ancient and the Apothecary both get Black Knight power weapons, which are 3 attacks that hit on 3s at strength 5 AP2, damage 1. Very standard elite infantry or sort of elite unit profiles, but that's fine because it's a good profile. And the Champion gets the Mastercrafted power weapon with a whopping 6 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6 AP2 and damage 2. He fights really hard, of course. This is, of course, a very solid weapon profile and is about double that of what a normal Black Knight can do. And, of course, really appreciates the anti-keywords they get. Now, since there are 3 models in this unit, they all do offer their own buffs, which we are going to get into right now, after we cover their ranged and melee weapons. So, in terms of abilities, the Apothecary, of course, has his Narthecium. When this unit contains its Apothecary, in your command phase, you can return 1 destroyed model, excluding ATVs and characters. The reason it mentions ATVs is because these guys can lead Outriders. Though this is, of course, very useful. The bikes can be quite tough, so being able to revive them is very handy to keep them in the fight longer, as well as protect the 3 main guys in your command squad. The banner is pretty standard. It just adds 1 to the OC, bringing everyone up to OC 3, which means with a squad of 9, you're getting a pretty beefy 27 OC. Very, 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 very solid for taking objectives. Honor or Death is the Champion's buff. And you add 1 to advance and charge rolls, and you can use the heroic intervention stratagem for 0 CP. I should also mention that the Champion has the character keyword, so if you're putting any enhancements on these guys, it does have to go on him. Again, all 3 of these buffs come together in a really good way of complementing each other perfectly. This pretty much makes up the triangle of 40k gameplay in sort of one move. Increasing your ease of dealing damage with making it to combat easier, as well as advancing faster. Your Narthecium increases your durability, and the banner makes you much stronger on objectives. These guys will be really hard to push off objectives and can out-OC most things. Though, of course, a big unit of them would have quite a large footprint on the table. That's also not necessarily a bad thing to keep enemies off of objectives as well as screening. I'd say in terms of if you are going to have to kill one of them, say you're just getting down to your last couple models, drop the banner. Because the Narthecium can actually allow you to revive the banner, as the only one with the character keyword here is the Champion. Of course, always drop the Champion last, but before him, of course, the Apothecary. The Apothecary can allow you to, in theory, revive the entire squad, but that's very unlikely, and I think also impossible given the amount of turns in the game. In terms of how I'd use them, I'd rate them quite highly, mainly because they offer a lot of buffs and a lot of damage. As I mentioned, the Champion is essentially 2 Black Knights strapped together with a damage 2 melee weapon, and his buff is really useful, especially in a way that allows them to, say, advance and shoot, such as in Gladius Task Force, or in general, just wanting to charge them quickly. There's also some synergy with their own detachment, as you'd expect with the Scout or the Turn 1 Deep Strike. Getting +1 to charge out of either of those is very, very useful. One interesting thing with them, though, is the Fire Discipline only specifies an Adeptus Astartes model, so you could put that on the Ravenwing Champion. Now, this may seem sort of counterintuitive, but remember, all of those Plasma Talons have 3 shots at half range, and they move very fast, so it's not very hard to do. In reality, if you're shooting at the Oath of Moment target, you can vaporize most things in the game, reducing knights to steaming piles of slag, and then going into charge if something does manage to survive, like, say, a massive unit of Terminators, and even then it's iffy if they'll survive. I think they're honestly a sleeper pick for that, and when I run Gladius, I will definitely be giving it to them, because I think in this era of actions, they're very useful with their speed, their OC, and their high damage at both shooting and in range. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Ravenwing Dark Talon is the most powerful weapon afforded to the Ravenwing. Equipped with arcane weaponry that is of extreme devastating potential, there are few things as fearsome in the skies of 40k as the Ravenwing Dark Talon. Hello everybody, I'm Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Ravenwing Dark Talon. Comes in at 210 points, so very pricey. It has the 20-inch plus movement of a flyer, toughness 8, a 3+ save, a 5+ invulnerable, and 11 wounds. Leadership 6+, and of course OC 0 as it can't contest objectives. In terms of its stat line there, it is extremely fragile. It will die to any sort of competent firepower, and its low toughness means it's really only resilient small arms. In terms of ranged weapons, it has 2 Hurricane Bolters, which are good anti-horde. They are rapid fire 6, twin-linked, Both of them are. It has 6 attack space, they hit on 3s, 24-inch range, strength 4, AP 0, and damage 1. So quite a devastating flurry of fire if you can get into rapid fire range. And then, of course, the main event is the Rift Cannon, which is blast and devastating wounds at 18-inch range, so very close range. D3 plus 1 shots that hit on 3s at strength 16, AP 4, and damage 3. This is a very scary profile for numerous reasons. It wounds everything efficiently, its high AP means you can't rely on saves, and cover won't be as effective, and also its damage 3 means it's very good at just punching through things and not having to worry about rolling low on a low damage to the front, though also means it can't spike as high. Overall, it is a very effective weapon against both infantry and tanks, though it will struggle a little bit against sort of mid-sized units like 5-man units of Terminators, where it won't be getting much blast. In terms of melee weapons, it has the pathetic close combat weapon with 3 attacks. It hit on 4s at strength 6, AP 0, and damage 1. This thing is not supposed to be in melee. If it is, something has gone terribly wrong, and this thing will certainly be dead in seconds. In terms of abilities, it has Deadly D3, so when it dies, it can explode for a little bit of damage. It has Hover, so started in Hover, because obviously. And then Stasis Bomb, which is once per battle, you select one enemy unit this model moved over, roll a d6. On a 1 to 3, that unit cannot fall back or advance. On a 4 to 6, it must remain stationary. This is really a solid, powerful rule that is effective on just about anything. You can't hit aircraft with it, but that does mean you can hit things like knights or Baneblades with it if you really wanted to, which is very powerful to stop them from repositioning or from keeping them, say they moved out into a risky position and cleared out the threats, you could keep them frozen in place. Now, in terms of flyers, the Ravenwing Dark Talon is certainly much better than most of them. Its Rift Cannon is genuinely threatening, and the Hurricane Bolters are useful enough for killing infantry. But it does have the problem of being a flyer that's 210 points. This means that it is, like, hilariously fragile. Any sort of plasma guns or melta-guns aimed at this thing will annihilate it, and if a las cannon points at it, this thing will essentially turn into dust. It really is just extremely fragile, and it lacks any durability buffs past its 5+ invulnerable save, which is nice to have, but it isn't going to save it, especially when it comes to medium to low AP things. Another weapon that would be extremely effective against this is autocannons. If you get targeted by, say, Predator Destructor with its autocannons and las cannons, kiss this thing goodbye. It is certainly dying. Its Rift Cannon, while it is very effective, is very close range, which means this thing is likely going to fly in, hurt something, and then die, which isn't the end of the world. Units can be good like that, but this thing costs a lot of points to be doing that. I'd say its overall damage output is pretty average for its points cost. For 210 points, you could get a Predator Destructor, you could get a lot of Hellblasters, or Hellblasters plus a character. And another problem is sort of its, again, as I've mentioned, it's overcosted, though there's reason for that as its ability is super powerful. Being able to move over something and possibly deny it movement could catch something out in a position where it really doesn't want to be and normally could escape from, but it can't as it has to remain stationary, and it can also mean that it's very hard for slower things to get into combat or for fast things to use their good movement. This is of course a very good rule, anyone can see that, but is it worth 210 points? I would say no. Again, Hellblasters you can get for this cost. You can get almost a squad of Deathwing Knights. You can get some Inner Circle companions and a character. It's just tough, really. It's better by a flyer standards, but that doesn't mean it's very good. I think in the hands of a skilled player, it could be made to work, since it's very powerful to stop units from moving, and its Rift Cannon is powerful enough to punch through most things. But I'd say for the most part, unless you're playing fluffy, probably leave this one on the shelf. This isn't the edition of flyers. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. The Nephilim jet fighter is a specially made fighter plane that is used exclusively by the Dark Angels and their successor chapters. It was custom made in the late 40th millennium. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Nephilim jet fighter for the Dark Angels in our quest to finish all of the Dark Angels reviews. So the Nephilim jet fighter comes in at 195 points, which is a little pricey. In terms of movement, it has 20 inches plus, given it's a plane, toughness 8, a 3+ save, a 5+ invulnerable save, 11 wounds, leadership 6, and OC 0. While the 5+ invulnerable is nice to bounce the occasional anti-tank shot, this profile is a little flimsy in general, and it isn't super resilient to most things except low-strength firearms. It is really, really susceptible to things like plasma and melta. In terms of ranged weapons, it comes standard with an Avenger Mega Bolter, which is the nose-mounted Gatling gun, or minigun, whatever you want to call it. It has sustained hits 1, 10 attacks that hit on 3s at 36-inch range with strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2. This does clean up the problem with heavy bolters with their lack of volume of fire, and does make it so it is a genuine anti-infantry threat to most kinds of infantry that are medium or light but will struggle against things like terminators and gravis armor. It also comes with 2 fleets of Black Sword missiles, which have anti-fly 2+, which is helpful enough. It has 2 attacks that hit on 3s at 36-inch range at only strength 8, AP 2, and damage D6. This is a little flaccid compared to the normal missile launcher, but the anti-fly 2+ is situationally very strong to snipe out things like, say, any flying characters or stuff like that. The Nephilim las cannons, which you can swap out for the bolters, or the big bolter, is 2 attacks that hit on 3s, 48-inch range, strength 2, AP 3, and damage D6 plus 1. I think 2 las cannon shots is not enough for it to sort of outcompete the specialization of the Avenger Mega Bolter, so I would generally leave that at home. And he also gets just 1 twin-linked heavy bolter, which is twin-linked, sustained hits 1, 3 attacks that hit on 3s at 36-inch range with strength 5, AP 1, and damage 2. Fairly standard heavy bolter profile. Close combat weapon is very pathetic. 3 attacks that hit on 4s at strength 6, AP 0, damage 1. In terms of abilities, Deadly Demise, D3, and Hover. Started in Hover always. And Lightning Fast Maneuvers, which means it's always -1 to hit, and if a flyer unit is shooting it, -1 to wound, which is whatever. Most fly units are melee focused, so that won't really come into play. And the -1 to hit is nice for low ballistic skill armies to buff its durability against those. Though overall, it's sort of a so-so sort of ability, nothing too special. In terms of how to best use it, I'd say the jet fighter in general isn't like the worst flyer in 40k. There's definitely worse out there, but it still isn't great. As I mentioned earlier, it's extremely susceptible to plasma guns and melta-guns given its low toughness and relatively mediocre wound count, especially for its cost. The invulnerable save does help, which I think puts it a league above other flyers, but the problem that plagues a lot of flyers is a lack of meaningful damage. This thing's really only good for punching down. Its missiles don't have enough strength to threaten even light vehicles very efficiently with only 2 shots, as they're strength 8 instead of strength 9 for some reason. Well, you could bring the las cannon. I feel like just 2 las cannon shots at this price point is just ridiculous when you could get a Predator or Destructor with 2 las cannons and a really effective autocannon. So keep it with the Mega Bolter if you are going to bring it, and also the Mega Bolter wins in the Rule of Cool department. In terms of detachments, there's really not too much to say. I guess it would appreciate the Firestorm Assault Force for the extra strength when it gets in close, but as it's a flyer, it's a little harder to coordinate buffs with things like tech marines, and so on. I'd say that it's really just unfortunate. If it were to be effective, it would probably need to be 35 points cheaper, which is pretty crazy. That's a huge decrease in cost, and also not really something I see them doing because they're trying to keep flyers out of the meta for good reason. If you remember 7th edition or some brief moments in 9th edition, flyers can be super oppressive and very unfun to play against, which is never fun. And as I said, its points cost is way too high, because for this points cost you could get an entire beefed out unit of Ravenwing Black Knights or a half and half Black Knights and Command Squad for pretty much the same price that would do the same thing in terms of firepower while also being able to be buffed better and has really solid melee. It's just really a rough time to be a flyer in 10th edition. GW really doesn't want them to be meta relevant in the slightest, which again I understand, but it is unfortunate because the jet fighter does look cool, I think. I think out of the Space Marine flyers, it's probably my second favorite compared to the Storm Raven, which is my favorite, which I was glad to see that got some use. But overall, it's just sad. Anyways, I've been Spoons Rattling. Hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. The Lion is the Primarch of the 1st Legion of the Space Marines, also known as the Dark Angels. He has returned in the Era Indominus after a 10,000-year slumber in the depths of the rock. After his duel with the arch-traitor Luther, he was taken away by the Watchers in the Dark deep into a cavern that nobody knew the location of, and in the chapter's time of need, he finally returned. He awoke in a place known as Mirror Caliban, where he had none of his memories, and through the help of a Watcher in the Dark, he eventually reclaimed his memories as well as his unique power sword, the Fealty, as well as the Emperor's Shield. This marked his return to the 41st millennium, where he is disgusted with the current state of the Imperium, often acting on his own or with his Risen. He bypasses most Imperial forces, especially Imperial legislative forces, and acts on his own, using his ability to forest walk to go where he is needed. Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are covering the Primarch of the Dark Angels, the Lion. So, the Lion comes in at a very hefty 300 points, so he has to do a lot to be worth it. In terms of stats, he has very interesting stats, as he's a Primarch: movement 8 inches, toughness 9, a 2+ save, a 3+ invulnerable save, 10 wounds, leadership 5+, and OC 4. These are all very, very good. The main highlight being his 3+ invulnerable save, which is one of, I believe, only 2 remaining in the game, with Azerman possessing the other one. This 3+ invulnerable save means that he can be immensely difficult to kill, and of course a 2+ save is good underneath that in case he's getting shot with 0 AP weapons. He has a lot of wounds at 10, his leadership is at 5+, so he's very unlikely to ever fail Battle Shock. He really is a beefcake when it comes to stats, to put it lightly. His toughness of 9 means he's highly resilient to most kinds of weaponry, and even anti-tank weapons have the problem of his 3+ invulnerable save. It takes a lot of focus fire to bring this guy down. In terms of ranged weapons, he has his unique combi weapon, the Arma Luminous, which has his bolt profile, which has pistol, 4 attacks that hit on 2s, 12-inch range, strength 4, AP 1, and damage 2. Then in terms of the plasma profile, it has pistol as well, only 2 attacks that hit on 2s at 12-inch range with strength 8, AP 3, and damage 2. Both very solid profiles, the bolt profile being better for killing light and medium infantry, and plasma, of course, better for heavy infantry and chipping at light vehicles. It is a solid profile, but of course the Lion is famed for his dueling capabilities, and that is where Fealty comes in, his melee weapon. Fealty has two modes, strike and sweep. The strike has lethal hits, which has 8 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 12, AP 4, and damage 4. About as devastating as a profile can get. It really is extremely effective against just about everything in the game. Its high AP means that you can't hide behind a good save, its high strength means that there's nothing that it won't wound efficiently, and its high damage means that any failed save is extremely painful. And then it can switch to sweep with sustained hits 1, 16 attacks that hit on 2s at strength 6, AP 3, and damage 1. Also extremely good anti-infantry killing. It's good for killing orcs, for killing space marines, for killing like guardsmen. There's really nothing that this guy won't efficiently chop through. Of course, a giant horde of, say, 25 models of like a command squad and guardsmen could definitely give him trouble. However, that still wouldn't necessarily be the end of the world, as you usually don't want this guy just roaming around by himself, but we'll get into that later. Of course, being a centerpiece model, he does have a select a buff ability, as I call it. Primarch of the First Legion, in your command phase, select one of the following buffs to be active until the next command phase. All Secrets Revealed is sort of the fun and fluffy one, I would say. When an enemy unit within 12 inches of this model uses a stratagem, you just instantly gain 1 CP. Of course, the Dark Angels don't have problems generating CP, but it does mean you have more to go around. They must then take a Battle Shock test. If they fail it, the stratagem has no effect and still counts as being used. Now this is a bit scattergun and matchup dependent, but against someone like Guard, this could truly be devastating if you're able to turn off, say, like Fields of Fire, or any of their other stratagems if they fail their Battle Shock, and there's no way to use it again as it already counts as being used. In terms of Martial Exemplar, which is kind of his damage buff, while friendly Adeptus Astartes models are within 6 inches to this, add 1 to the hit roll in melee. This is generally useful for things like Inner Circle Companions that hit on 3s, and does help him be pretty much immune to hit modifiers, meaning that he'll almost always be hitting on 2s if he has this buff active, which there's good reason to activate it right before he gets into combat. Though I think the best of his buffs is actually no hiding from the Watchers. No hiding from the Watchers is an aura of 6 inches around him, and then while friendly Adeptus Astartes units are within it, they have a 4+ feel no pain against mortal wounds. Now, we know the Lion is almost immune to most kinds of firepower, given his 3+ invulnerable save, but things like devastating wounds, or doom bolts, or psychic attacks that have devastating wounds could chew through him disappointingly quickly. However, with a 4+ feel no pain, which is one of the most busted abilities you can have, he is able to reflect a lot of that damage off of him, and it extends to the units around him. While it's not uncommon for Dark Angels units to have a Watcher in the dark, this is useful, as you don't need to use your once per battle thing that the other Watchers usually have. This pairs extremely well with just about any kind of unit, and it can apply to any Adeptus Astartes unit, whether it's a tank, or it's some scouts, or whatever it may be. This does, of course, pair well with the fact that he wants his bodyguard to be nearby, which we will get into once we wrap up talking about these. But returning to the other two, All Secrets Revealed is an interesting one that I think you need to have, like, confidence people are going to use it. or people are going to play into it. If the Lion is in the center of the board with his bodyguard, there's not much they can do to not do that, except not use stratagems, which for some armies doesn't really matter, but for some really do. For example, Chaos Space Marines in the Zealots, they can't get their reroll wounds as efficiently because there's a very solid chance that they just lose the battle shock and then they wasted a CP and you gained a CP. This could be useful to use things like, what's the name? Counteroffensive, sorry, I was slipping my memory. Or any other expensive stratagem, and with Azrael around, you can pretty consistently just, be using stratagems all the time, if you know what I mean. Now, of course, these are not his only abilities. He does have 2 extra abilities that we're going to cover right now. And one last note on Martial Exemplar. It is generally useful, but I'd say out of the 3 is probably the most tame, though if you are fighting someone with -1 to hit, of course bring that so you're not debuffing his damage. In terms of his other 2 abilities, the Emperor's Shield, which is his big golden shield, when a melee attack is allocated to this model, on each saving throw of a 6+, the attacker suffers 1 mortal wound. This isn't anything too special, though it does discourage hordes from trying to fight back against him, though you can't in this edition you can't choose to not fight. If you're in melee, you do have to fight, so even if some guardsmen do survive, there is a chance that, you bounce back damage onto them and instantly kill them. This is, of course, very useful when it comes up. Nothing major, though. And while we have skipped on to best use, I will cover, there's a friendly Adeptus Astartes infantry model within 3 inches. This guy's lone operative. We're going to cover how to proc that here. So the Lion, it does blend sort of a simplicity of his giant cannon melee and his complex buffs, which I really do like. He's a fun unit to use, really. His damage is very general purpose at both range and in melee. While he won't be shooting down tanks, he will certainly be able to chip most things, or flat out blow up some infantry models. As mentioned before, he's immensely durable. A 3+ invulnerable save is something that should not be understated. That means 66% of all damage that manages to get to him saving will just be deflected. And anything less than that, of course, is going to be very uncommon because of his high toughness and high durability. He is tough. It is no way around it. In terms of bodyguard choices, I think Deathwing Knights would make a fine choice given their durability. Inner Circle Companions can keep up with them a little better. Though, of course, it's not the end of the world, and one of the best things you can do is run the Combi Weapon Lieutenant, as he has Lone Operative and the Infantry keyword. So long as he's palling around with the Lion, you can't be shot outside 12 inches because they can't shoot the bodyguard, and since they can't shoot the bodyguard, he'll always have Lone Operative, so they can't shoot the Lion. He's a slight points tax, but I'd say he's definitely worth bringing for the Lion, if for no other reason than to just keep him safe, as well as his buff being genuinely good against your marked objective, if you will. One weird thing to note is that he doesn't have the Deathwing keyword, which seems strange. He really should be. He is the Primarch of the Dark Angels. How could he not be part of the Inner Circle? But that's just really weird. But granted, he would probably be just so insane with +1 to wound that they were like, well, he doesn't need that. Though he should have it. Though in other detachments, like Gladius Task Force, he can easily get it with the Lance stratagem, which would definitely be worth using, because that would take his melee damage from Apocalyptic to basically the Tsar Bomba of 40k. I'm not sure there's much that could withstand that outside of perhaps another Lion. Outside of that, I'd say he's really at home in almost any detachment. As I mentioned, he doesn't have the Deathwing keyword, but having the rest of your army be stronger and your Deathwing Knight's bodyguards be stronger isn't necessarily a bad thing. And of course, they love the 6-inch aura of resistance to mortal wounds, especially because mortal wounds are one of the best way to deal with terminators. But in terms of other detachments, Gladius is good for any Space Marine unit. Stormlance would allow him to advance and charge, and he does move 8 inches, so with an advance he's averaging, 11 inches, which is pretty solid, and then an advanced charge is always good. I'd say he fits in rather well just about everywhere. But that has been pretty much my review of the Primarch of the Dark Angels, Lionel Johnson. That wraps up all of the Dark Angels units. We just have to cover a couple detachments and then we're done. I've been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe.